Hi, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on how to tackle the speed versus safety dilemma. This is a LeadDev webinar created in partnership with Harness. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and our panelists will head over to the LeadDev Slack to answer some of your questions in the technical strategy channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Daniel Korn. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering at Lemonade, and today I'll be joined by Aditi, PA, Tanisha, and Owain to share their experience and insights. Now I'll ask each of you to quickly introduce yourself. Aditi, please go first.
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Aditi. I have a background in engineering and software development, and I have been CTO at quite a few places over the last 8-ish years. I have worked at pre-Series A startups to publicly listed companies, and more recently, a private equity-backed organization. I love solving problems, and that's what keeps me going with this.
Thank you, Aditi. Owain, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Owen. I'm currently a director of engineering working at Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. I've worked for the last 15 years as a software engineer, manager, and director. The last 5 years, I've been working in the cloud infrastructure space, so building cloud services. I currently run the API management organization inside Oracle. We have a global distributed remote team. And I'm really excited about this panel and this topic because managing cloud services, obviously balancing speed and safety is a really important part of that world. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Owain. Looking forward to hearing all of your insights. Tanisha, want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Tanisha Barnett. I am a director at Intuit, specifically working on the MailChimp product under our Intuit area. I am excited about this panel because all about safety and what we are doing in our engineering areas. This is really close to my heart, and I am excited to learn about each and everyone's perspective on how they're able to leverage all of this throughout.
Thank you, Tanisha. And last but not least, PA.
Hi, everybody. I'm PM Mas. I'm VP of Engineering at Split that got acquired by Harness recently. I've been working in the developer tool space for quite a while, especially on the trade-off on speed and safety, as it's a lot related to what we do here. Prior to that, I was at Box and at Microsoft, where I work on numerous digital transformation, agile transformation, and product development. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you all for your introductions. Now let's dive into today's topics. As we all know, speed is a critical factor in today's tech world, whether it's about beating a competitor to market or rapidly responding to business needs. But does moving fast always means compromising on safety? Can we truly deliver high quality, secure, and reliable software while we maintain the speed and the business demands? That's what we'll explore today. We're going to answer these questions with our panel of experts. So to kick things off, let's start by defining what fast and safe mean in software development. Tanisha, when you think of moving fast, is it just about meeting deadlines and reacting quickly to business needs, or does it also include executing according to plan and pivoting swiftly when it's necessary?
Yeah, it's not just about the deadlines or those quick responses. It's really about sustainable velocity. For us, true speed is about having systems in place that allow for rapid iteration without sacrificing that quality. Our safety really needs to be built into the process so that we can move quickly. And we're not fixing mistakes later, but preventing them before we even go through the practice. And we try to use continuous integration, automated testing, collaborating across teams. So, the real speed comes from how well our safety and efficiency are integrated in the process from the start rather than after the fact. It's about understanding the technical pieces and the organizational elements that fit into both of those, not just executing on the work.
That's really interesting, Tanisha. We're gonna touch these points a bit later. Maybe, Owen, do you see a difference between what moving fast means in different types of organizations or different sizes?
Yeah, definitely. I think speed is relative to the type of organization you're in and the size of the organization. And I think the other element to consider when you think about speed is probably risk. So certain types of organizations, certain software products are more risky than others. So when you think about speed, you've also got to factor in risk into that equation. I don't think there's one definition of what speed looks like. To me, speed is about being able to solve problems quickly, react quickly to business problems, react quickly to problems in production, and consistently being able to deliver value to customers. But I don't think there's a consistent definition of speed. And I think smaller companies might be able to move faster than maybe larger companies because maybe there's less risk involved. So I think it really depends on the company.
Interesting. You actually touched the level of risk. So maybe you can give us your insights into how we can decide on what level of risk or
Yeah.
compromise is acceptable when we talk about safety, especially in areas like security, but not only.
Yeah, I think it's fundamental to the conversation about safety in general. So if you think about risk, it's about if I make a mistake in production and I cause an incident to a customer, for some businesses that could mean a loss of customer trust. It could mean an outage in the cloud infrastructure space. For example, if you make a mistake, potentially you impact hundreds of thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of businesses. If you're maybe a smaller startup, maybe you have different factors to consider around risk. Maybe you don't have as much pressure. Maybe a mistake doesn't cause such significant impact. So I think you really have to think about that when you think about speed, really. So I think if you're a certain type of company, maybe financial services is another great example. I've worked in fintech. You have to be very careful with making mistakes with customer data. But if you're a smaller, more nimble startup, I think you can go faster. So I think risk is definitely a key part of the question.
This is a great point. Thank you. Aditi, if we want to go back to what safety means, do you think it's just about avoiding bugs or regressions or downtime, or do you also include other things like security, maintainability of code, technical debt, whatever else you have in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely the latter. So I want to reference back to what Tanisha said at the very start of this discussion, that actually speed is a long-term sustainability thing. Yes, we do end up in delivery cycles, and the reality is we do talk about things being, when is this feature getting shipped? Because practically that's the sort of conversations we're more likely to have with our stakeholders. But what we can't do is compromise the longer term sustainability of that feature that is being delivered. So in my mind, personally, I would always, and especially as a CTO, right? Like the buck stops with the CTO. You wanna think of that longer term impact as well, and then balance all those impact risk factors. And really, if there are a few things that you're gonna let go through, and you don't even want to be a stickler and a perfectionist, because again, that's where you're getting the balance wrong sometimes. You want to look into is how quickly can I close some of these things if I am going to get comfortable with the risk of something. So what I mean by that is having a slightly longer term view and saying, when on the roadmap do I have the opportunity to fix something, and how quickly can I get it done? With what sort of skills and resources can I get done if the sort of risk appetite of the business of something going wrong in that interim period is acceptable. And it's important for us as leaders to not have that sort of decision made in isolation, but to involve our stakeholders in that decision making.
That's super interesting. We're going to circle back into balancing also the business needs a little bit later. So I'm going to definitely go back to you around that. One last thought about the general definitions. Any of you have would like to share some ideas on how to actually measure fast or safety in your organizations? Are there specific metrics or KPIs you're looking at?
I'll take a stab. It's difficult to have an absolute measure because the measure is often like very in the present, while the velocity you build is a lot in the future. And so that's often quite complicated. So you have to do indirect measurements or like proxy in a lot of aspects. And that's where people look at, on the velocity, maybe PR, number of PRs per engineers per unit of time. It can be change lead time, all those DORA metrics around there as well. And then on the safety, it might be the number of incidents or bugs or other things like that that are pulling you back and slowing you down over time. It's at the end of the day, at a high level, at a business level, you want to understand how much value you're adding over time. And that's your real velocity. It's like how much value do you add over time? That's where controlling safety is controlling, the decrease in value. Because each time you basically fail, you decrease the value you're providing. And so I think that's all those proxy essentially start building your equation to measure it.
That's a great point. Focusing on the value. I definitely agree. Let's move on to some lessons learned the hard way. Would any of you like to share a story where prioritizing speed over safety led to failure or downtime? PA, maybe you would like to continue.
Sure. Yeah, we talked a little bit about it like earlier, and I think one story that happened to me in a previous company where we had earlier company, a smaller company, and we were trying to move fast, and so it was adding features, and that's where like the focus is very much on the short-term velocity, and we take shortcuts. And so you take one shortcut, you take a second shortcut, and we started building features, and we were deploying like once a week. And as the company grew, the deployment every week became bigger and bigger to the point where essentially we didn't have enough safety and we started failing the deployment every other week. And then after that, it's turmoil. It's like a lot of hands have to be called in to solve issues, to identify the issue, work on the fixes and whatnot. And it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of disruptions. And so that's when you have the feeling of going fast, but you are not actually going fast because you spend your time basically taking steps backward. And so that was quite an experience going through that and a lot of turmoil. At some point, it got so bad and we were bringing the database down too many times that we had to essentially stop everybody and basically take a pause and really focus on stabilizing and putting the right safeguards in place so that we could move forward after that. So I think we had to stop like for a month fully, which was pretty intense. And the recovery was quite an effort, but also a lot of lessons learned through that.
I can almost feel your pain through the story. And I think we've all been there. So you mentioned lessons. What key lessons did you take away? Or maybe how did you change the approach about balancing speed and safety moving forward?
So like during that exercise, for me, like one of the key learning was like each time when we're thinking we're going too fast, we need to take some time to slow things down. It's almost a wrong equation. Like in my head, it was more like I need to manage risk. And so essentially like our deployment, we're getting so many changes in it every week that the better thing to do was actually to move faster and to do more deployments because each deployment was smaller and each deployment was less risky and easier to manage. So that was one lesson is like safety doesn't mean necessarily going slower. Sometimes it actually means going faster. It's really managing risk. There are a number of tools now in the developer tools that are also helping some of those things. from like CI/CD to like feature flags and other things like that, that really helps gaining in velocity while controlling the risk. And I think that, for me, that's a key learning. Learn to control the risk, which doesn't mean necessarily going slower.
That's a great lesson. Thank you for sharing. Owen, maybe you have a story or a lesson learned the hard way.
I think a similar point that was just made, which I think is just a really interesting point. When you start thinking about speed and safety, you would just think about going fast will cause more risk. And I think the example I would have is we had a situation where we'd caused an incident in production, we'd identified a bug, and we did a pretty thorough analysis of that situation. We wrote some code, we came up with a solution to that bug, which was causing customer impact. But because we were too slow to get that out into production, what happened was a few days later, the same incident happened again, but for a different customer. So although we'd fixed the issue, we were too slow in getting the changes out, which resulted in another subsequent customer impacting issues. So I think just building on that point that going slow is also a risk as well. If you're not able to react quickly to fixing things and you're too slow, that's also a risk. So I think the point was just made about large deployments. I think that's another great example of that, where going slow can also be risky as well.
I think we can all definitely agree on that. Probably our audience as well. Let's get more practical and talk about tips and tricks. Tanisha, how do you balance delivering new features quickly while you also ensure quality and avoid regressions, security issues, and maintain quality?
One of the things, and I think PA brought it up, is about utilizing feature flags, making them smaller so that we can test them thoroughly. We make sure that we're not just testing what we did, but we are taking into account all the different pieces that we're feeding from us and the dependencies that are on us. And by making those feature flags, we can lessen the impact on our customers, reduce the risk, but really get things out faster and see if there are bigger issues that we may not have found in testing. We all know that you can't test every single piece and part of everything that we're doing, but putting it behind a feature flag and really focusing on smaller impact can reduce that risk and find issues faster for us to recover faster and to lessen that impact. So that's really something that we utilize. And then if we can't put it behind a feature flag, what we've done is we're releasing after hours so that there's less impact and less risk to our customers also. And that monitoring is not I put it in, I'm stepping away. It is, we are monitoring all of our different pages. Are we seeing errors? We are testing it. We are on it. And the teams are really there.
Nice. You had, I think, a couple of interesting points, not just the feature flags, but also the post-release monitoring and general ownership. We'll get to that also a bit later. So I'll definitely go back to you. Any other things that worked for you in your organizations?
I think I'd maybe add it's useful to practice dealing with failure on a regular basis, as in sometimes mistakes will happen in production. So one way to reduce risk is actually to do those practices to make sure, if your on-calls are paged for an incident, you can roll back quickly. So regularly practicing those things. And I think just the feature flag idea is lovely. I think that's a really good way to do that as well. You can also release things to a subset of customers for a couple of days, and you can kind of leave it there for a few days before rolling it out more widely. I think that's another great strategy. If you roll out to a subset of maybe less critical customers, should I say, maybe you have internal customers, things like that, you can let it sit there for a few days and identify issues before rolling it out any further. I think that's another great strategy.
Definitely. I agree with the gradual rollout point. Aditi, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, I'd just like to build on Wayne's point around, bringing together the known customers bit is also utilizing members of the organization irrespective of the size of the organization, to do some of that upfront testing. Testing quality is not just a skill of technology. Yes, I mean, I'm not minimizing the role that QA specialists play in the process, but it's just to say that one human can't find all the possible paths to it, and therefore the more known safe customers there are, even if they happen to be members of your organization, the faster a response to when things go wrong can happen. Or it's faster for a tech team to try and reproduce those scenarios and go, actually, this is something wrong. So that's another thing that I generally try and encourage in every organization that I've worked at, is to sort of say, right, how do we open up some test builds, whether that's through feature flags, whether that's through, app distribution, etc., and incentivize our own staff to sort of engage with it, and not for it not just to be another thing that the company is asking for or asking for volunteering, but it's worth their while to spend that time testing, providing feedback.
I love the direction that it's taking, and for me, like, actually, when everybody was speaking, well, first when we're talking about feature flags, knowing that I'm building a tool like that, I love it. No, but more seriously, the thing that underneath it that like kind of popped in my mind is like how we need to bring a different culture of ownership. It's like all those tools are enabling teams to be better owners of the software they're releasing, of the values they're providing, of the quality they're providing. And I think having that feedback loop, being on call, understanding the pain that we can create or the value we can create, having that in place, having the control to basically have ownership, because just saying ownership is not enough, but being in control of their deployments, being in control of their releases, that basically also brings ownership, that brings control to them. And I think that's how it really shifts things in culturally, which at the end of the day, the culture is what makes that possible.
That's an interesting point. So maybe we can dive a little bit into ownership and accountability. And so you talk about on-call rotations. Are there any other ways that help you ensure your team take full ownership and responsibility for the quality of your delivery? Maybe also speed. Anything that that worked for you? Tanisha, maybe.
Yeah, I'll start. So one of the things we are doing is making sure that there is like clear expectations at the start. So it's an end-to-end ownership. It is understanding what we're trying to build, understand why we're trying to build it, understand how we can implement it, how it deals with the quality of what we're trying to do, the performance, and then the on-call, because we're having to support it after. So it's not, I do this part and I'm handing it off to someone else, but no, the piece that we're responsible for it end to end, even if another team is working with us. So it's really about understanding that end-to-end responsibility, that we own the piece that is going to our customer and that is impacting our customer. And then I love the fact that, and we do the same thing, that we're having people on call so that issues that we're creating, we're understanding and we're feeling that pain so that the next time we're not repeating the same thing over and over again. So it's not just I've done it, I'm stepping away, but I'm on call and I'm responsible. I don't want to be woke up. I don't want these things to happen. I want our customers also to not feel the pain because some of us are our customers and utilizing those products.
You're muted, Daniel.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Great.
That was that was very interesting. Thank you for that. Do you have other ideas on how to create a culture of accountability, like you just mentioned now, aside from the on-calls themselves? Maybe.
Yeah, I can probably think of one, which is to celebrate successes where someone in the team, no matter how senior or junior they are, have demonstrated that end-to-end ownership possibly where they've gone above and beyond. Depending on their sort of recognition style, the personal sort of style in terms of how they like to be recognized, it doesn't have to be something big. It doesn't always have to sort of result in a remuneration. Just a special thank you, or calling it out in a all hands with peers and colleagues, just to celebrate that demonstration of ownership, also goes a long way, and it sort of motivates others to demonstrate the same capability.
That's a brilliant point. I love it.
I just wanted to
Thanks,
add maybe one more point to that as well. I think another area to think about with culture is to maybe have leadership involved in being responsible for some of those numbers as well. So having managers and leaders be accountable in some way, or kind of own their numbers, kind of own their operations, rather than seeing a divide between it's an engineering problem, not a leadership problem. I think that can really help with the culture when managers really feel responsible for those operational numbers as well.
Great point. Let's maybe go back to some practical tips and insights on our trade-off. I think we mentioned having all of our organization involved in the release or the monitoring after the deployment. So I was thinking about quality and specifically testing and automations and areas like that. So I would like to know if any of you incorporated automation or testing to ensure the quality of your delivery, and maybe that helped balancing with speed, maybe as part of your CI/CD or other ways. Tanisha, you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'd like to share. One of the things that we've done is we are doing shift left. So we're not waiting until the end. It is all along the way at the beginning, understanding what it is we're trying to test, understanding all the different pieces and parts that go along with it. All while we're building them in small releases so that we can control it, but doing it up front and not waiting until the end. And we're saying, yes, we're done. And now we're trying to test it. And now we're trying to implement it. And we're finding different things. So that is one of the things that we have done, which is shift left, which is shifting it earlier in the process versus waiting until the end and say, all right, now we're ready to worry about quality.
I love the idea of shift left. Does it also mean that the testing, whether automation or manual, is also done by the engineers or dedicated QA?
It's actually done by different groups. So we have dedicated QA, that's part of it. We also have engineers that are set up. What we've done specifically is we've rounded engineers per sprint, that different engineers are part of the QA organization, and they are testing things up front. And so that they also understand when they're delivering code, what that looks like, how you validate it, so that there's not always a dependency on a QA resource, that we're all responsible for the quality, not just the QA. We're also pull in our product teams. They understand what we're trying to build and what ultimately the customer should be seeing. So pulling them in early also helps us out at the end. So we're finding things early in the process.
That's a great point. I feel that that shift left and also involving the engineers kind of bring us back also to the ownership and responsibility point. So that's a great tip. I found that when our engineers have confidence before they release their code, it plays a key role in shipping it safely and maybe even with speed. Maybe do you agree, or and if you do, have you taken any actions to kind of boost your team's confidence when they make changes?
I can speak a little bit about that. Actually, I don't think I've had a QA team in 15 years. So I might be more on the extreme side of the panel. And like by choice. So I've been always pushing that responsibility on the team itself, which is a combination of the engineers, the manager, the PM, together to validate things. And I haven't really noticed meaningful differences on the quality of the things when it comes out. It's validated. But what it helps really building is a muscle of what do I want to make sure I don't break later or nobody else is going to break. So for me, testing automation is not so much for validating the thing we're going to release right now, that is to prevent anybody else from breaking it later. And so that's that balance. And really the whole challenge and conversation we have in our team around testing is not if we should do testing, is more how much testing should we do? And then what kind of testing do we want to invest more in or less in and whatnot? And so it's all a balance. Unit tests, they can only cover so much from a functionality perspective, obviously, but they run really fast. And if you go all the way to the other end-to-end tests, they're much more thorough. They're much better from a customer point of view, but they take a long time. So you can have so many of them. Because if you have too many of them, then your automation takes so long that essentially people start switching context and spending too much time on something else. And so that's really that balance of like how much investment gains on how much value and at what point we are diluting too deep. Because if you go too deep in the end-to-end test, you're basically putting too much effort and you're not getting enough value out of it. And so it's balancing that with other things, like to control essentially the rollout and reduce the risk without excessive investment in testing. So that's the main conversation for us.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about something we've mentioned earlier, which is navigating the business needs or the business pressure. So when our business demands speed, how do you handle situations where the only way to meet those demands might involve compromising safety? Aditi, you wanna kick us off here?
Yes, brings a lot of memories, this one. And I see smiles all around. So we've all been there. I think that there is no silver bullet. It very much depends on the personalities that form the business, as in your stakeholders, and what the situation is, what the business situation is. If it's an underperforming business that's either loss-making or is massively missing their targets, then that's a shared pressure, right? Then as a technical leader, you would struggle to be the person to say, no, we can't go this fast. But whereas if things are going well and it's just one of those things, if I just want to do it, can we do it faster? Then that's a different conversation you have. But I think where I've landed, or first principles where I've landed, is to be really open and honest with the business stakeholders, and to try and educate them on what the potential impact might be. Again, don't try and sugarcoat it. So please don't try and make it seem a lot better than what it might be. But equally, please don't try and be the doomsayer and make it sound like a lot worse than what it might be. And have a few options of here's what could happen. Here are some of the other things that we could do, which might get you to bridge this gap or might try and like solve this particular thing that you're trying to solve with this, by pushing for speed, etc. And obviously there's room for having those discussions. And then after a point, we all have to sort of disagree, agree, commit. I think if occasionally there might be situations where it really makes you very, very uncomfortable to agree to something, then try and get someone more senior to try and tie break that and get them to buy into the decision. This, again, depending on what your level is, this might be the CEO of the company, might be the CTO, might be a CPO, etc. But do try and make those things. Times where I've seen it go wrong is when someone tried to make that decision in isolation to try and say, yep, that's fine, let's just do what the business says, or no, don't care what the business says, we're just going to go at the speed we go because these are the things that we're stopping the business from running into.
Thank you. These are great points.
I want to emphasize that. All right. The last point that Aditi said, I think is so important. Like people making decisions in isolation is so detrimental to everybody. Because essentially, when you do that, you're taking the whole responsibility on yourself, even though originally by default, your hierarchy is responsible as well. And so if you don't include them in it, then you basically remove the responsibility from them, while they should basically carrying it even more than you should. And so you really have a duty of informing them and explaining the situation and making the decision with them when it's a hard trade-off like that.
Pierre, maybe you can continue with some strategies that you find useful when you need to deliver some bad news, when you have to sacrifice speed for safety.
Yeah, so I think there are different classes of problem. So I think first, it goes to something that Owen said early in the call around, the amount of risk and value that's at play essentially in the company and the tolerance for it. There are some things that are like more pointed. It's like, oh, I'm just going to ship the feature without testing it or without wrapping it into a feature flag or something. That's much more narrow, and that's like kind of a general practices. And so that's common practices, but it's when we want to involve in like to argue investment in tech debt, that's when it gets more difficult. And I think it takes a lot of patience. One, we have to expect it's not going to be a single time. We can't come with just a plan, an idea, and basically sell it all at once. It's going to be a lot of education, especially if they're like business partners rather than engineering partners. They need to relate to it, so you need to speak to them in terms that they're going to understand. And even then, it's like their appreciation of risk is often diminished compared to what you might feel. And so it takes some examples, it takes some burns that can illustrate it a little bit sometimes. Ideally, not too painful, before you can basically make some point there. I've built occasionally like business models of like, hey, if we don't invest more there, then basically this is the amount of time we can spend on product all the time and how it evolves. If we don't invest in tech debt, like it just keeps getting worse. And so people like pictures or things like that or models like that help people understanding how things connect. And then it depends on the personality of your business partners and what they value, what their priorities are, and aligning to them, I think, is important.
Thank you, PA. That was really valuable. Maybe now we can take a few minutes to move to questions from our audience. I think the first one we kind of answered, so maybe we'll go back. It was when shifting from speed to safety or slowing down for maintenance work, how do you communicate this change? So we talked a little bit about communication with the business part or other leaders. So maybe we'll keep it to the end and think if you have something else to add to that. Darren asked the following question. Deployments can come in many shapes and sizes, which include different impacts and testing need. Can you recommend a process to deal with the variability to achieve consistency?
I would maybe start with saying that not all deployments are the same. I think it's an important thing to recognize that fact. I think sometimes when you read advice online, it feels like there should be one size fits all. So I think it will depend on the size of the release and the nature of the release. So if you're making risky changes, such as like an infrastructure change or a database change, you might actually want separate processes in your company to deal with those types of changes. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think it's worth having like an awareness that there are different types of changes and maybe having different policies for each type of change.
I'll add on to it. And I mentioned this earlier. One of the things that is like just a basic foundation for us is that everything has to be feature flagged. If we're going to release it in the middle of the day, it has to have a feature flag. If it doesn't, if it can't be feature flagged, it has to be released later. Or a senior leader has to sign off on it if it's not behind a feature flag and it needs to be released now. So having some basics foundational things that you can add to a deploy. And then as things are different, then you can kind of adjust based upon those. I think having some basics would at least help get you started.
I can also build on that, which is having a baseline, especially if you've got some automation tests, etc. Then having the baseline requirement to say these many tests or this percentage or this suite of tests need to pass, etc. And anything less than that. So again, don't hold back from sort of failing your builds, etc. Of course, engineers are going to complain that you might be being too pessimistic. But rather that than having to deal with something in production. But again, there's a balance. Find that balance that works for you.
Thank you for all the answers here. Aditya, I think you also partially covered another question of how do we assess the quality of automation of pre-release checks, and so that's it's also great. Kavita, moving on to another question. Kavita asked, in our bias for action culture, how do we ensure that investment in safety is also understood as action or progress by the business team? So again, how we can ensure that the investment in safety is also understood as action or progress by the business team.
Yeah, I think it's a lot on connecting the value to the business. It's like I see, like sometimes we've had big refactoring to do to really make things more like either microservices or more extensible. And I think when we connect, we do that because one, we have a monolith and we need to break it down because it's really painful to basically keep working on it. But velocity is a hard thing to quantify. The gain in velocity you're going to get is a very hard thing to quantify. And if we can connect it to a product story of like, hey, if we make that transformation, now you can do that kind of product that you've been wanting to do, then it basically creates like more alignment from a business standpoint. So it's really a matter of you have your own drivers, but you need to connect to other people's driver in the business. Otherwise, you need to basically have them want to have your own driver, and that's going to be very painful and difficult.
Thanks, PA. I think we covered all of our questions from the audience in some way or another. So just one last follow-up to our tips, maybe if we have like another minute. Have you found the collaboration with security or infrastructure teams helpful for maintaining quality and safety? Do you have such a process in your company or in your organization?
I can maybe quickly add that I think it's worth having a dedicated team at some scale if security is critical enough to your business. So if you have generalists owning security, I think that's fine in some cases, but if your business depends on security, it pays to have experts security is a complex topic. So I think it's worth having specialization, depending on the type of business. If you're in banking, if you're in certain types of business, I think a specialist security team makes a lot of sense. It's quite hard for generalists to do that job well.
Great.
I'd like to build on that just a little bit, which is to say, totally support the idea of having specialists in the team, but always please be conscious that it's not the specialist's responsibility to make sure that the product is secure. It is still the engineer's responsibilities. You want to use these SMEs as people to guide you and sort of help you figure out the requirements or tell you whether you've done a good enough or an acceptable enough job. But often teams fall into that lulled sense of security by saying, oh, it's that person or that team or that department's accountability. And please just watch against that. But yes, I totally support the need for specialists because it's not something that a generalist will be able to sort of write down requirements for and say that's good enough.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It has to be owned by everyone. And if you could lean on a specialist in certain cases, I think that's great. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and
Thank you both.
I would encourage to lean in with those teams, because what I've seen also is like there is a big divide and there is posture on both sides. And like there are security team where like I look at them almost at binary culture of like you have the ultra safe, like wanting to basically just not take any risk security team, and the security team that's going to be more aligned to business drivers and trying to move things forward, and that's going to basically try to fit in the flow. And I think you want to lean in and reach and connect with them as deeply as possible to influence their culture to be more like the latter, because that enables you while it protects you. And that's the best impact you can get with them.
I think we got to a complete answer here. Thank you, all three of you. We actually got to a couple more questions from the audience, and I got an approval to run over a few minutes. So another question was how to encourage a tech team not used to using feature flagging to use it more regularly, apart from just telling them to do so.
I can kind of jump in here. What we've done is part of it is communicating clearly of the importance of feature flag. What is it used for? How are we using it? Talk about it, rolling it out to the teams and making sure that everybody understands the importance of it. And then as a leader, it's our responsibility if something goes out without a feature flag to really talk to our teams on why wasn't a feature flag used? What is going on there? And making sure that everybody really truly understands how that is, and this is a requirement. We don't have a way to, other than communicating in it and being constant. And it's something that we had to kind of grow into to ensure that a feature flag for every single thing is put in place, because everything can't have a feature flag. So I think that's part of our dilemma, is everything can't have a feature flag. So we put some things in place that are staples for engineers, and this is how we work.
I can give a couple more things, considering that I've been working with building a tool like that for quite a while. So there's definitely the kind of learning from the mistakes of like doing postmortems and saying, okay, well, next time, probably a better way to control and to reduce the risk is to use a feature flag. One thing that I've seen that have worked for me also pretty well is like when teams are working on features, then I asked to see it in production for my user. And I'm like, hey, can I basically see it in my demo org? Can I see it for my user? And so that basically gets them in the habit of seeing the value of being able to share their work along the way early on. And so that basically incentivizes them to really put the structure for it. I also ask for like rollout plans early on in the design phase, and that tends to basically help them thinking about it, because often we think about what we're going to build as functionality. Then once we're done with that, we think about what we're going to test. And then once we're done with that, we're thinking about how we're going to put it out. And sometimes there's a lot of benefit in thinking ahead of it. And those things tend to shift the culture fairly quickly and in a less painful way.
I've just got one more sort of strategy that worked for me, which was to actually sell the idea of feature flags to a product team. So suddenly people writing the tickets were actually writing the tickets to even say, I need a feature flag for this. And they were then suddenly utilizing that to drive UAT. And as I said, getting people in the organization also more involved with testing certain things out, because then it was tied to their developer accounts and so on. So again, I'm all for like engineers deciding how to build stuff, but sometimes just baking the need for feature flags into the requirements from the outset where it's applicable also sort of takes away that decision point from individual developers of should I do this with a feature flag or not, because it's already prescribed there.
Thank you, Aditi, for rounding us off here. Today's panel covered many topics. We started by defining what it means to move fast and stay safe. We explored practical tips and tricks and insights from our panelists. We discussed how to navigate the business needs and communicate to the business and get the buy-in. And we talked about ownership, fostering ownership and accountability within the teams for both quality and speed. I'd like to thank our panelists for all the good insights in today's panel. And of course, for our audience for joining us today and for the valuable questions. We'll be heading over now to the LeadDev Slack channel in the hashtag technical strategy. So please head there and we can continue the discussion.